All right, so we're all on this huge quest for clean fuels, right? But what if I told you that the biggest source of emissions from these amazing new fuels doesn't even come from the tailpipe? That's what we're going to dig into.
So here's the central question, and it comes from this really cool life cycle assessment study by the French research group IFP Energies Nouvelles. They're asking, what's the real carbon cost of a so-called clean fuel? I'm talking about when you account for everything.
Okay, so first things first, we've got to talk about this hidden emissions problem. You know, we're all so focused on what comes out of the exhaust pipe, but that's really just the tip of the iceberg. It's the final step in a much, much longer story.
Here's a simple way to think about it. Take a t-shirt. Its carbon footprint isn't just from you washing it, right? No way. It's from growing the cotton, the energy used in the factory, shipping it across the world. Well, fuel is exactly the same. The real story, the real impact, happens way before it ever gets near an end.
So if we can't just look at the tailpipe, how do we measure the total impact? Well, scientists have a really specific method for this. It's kind of like forensic accounting, but for carbon. They call it measuring from well to wake. Now, the official term for this is a life cycle assessment, or LCA, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a method to tally up the entire environmental footprint of a product, in this case a fuel, from the absolute beginning of its life to the very end.
And this whole journey is broken down into two main stages. First, you've got well to tank. This covers everything from digging up the raw materials to producing the fuel and getting it to the pump. Then you have tank to wake. This is the part we all know, the emissions that happen when you actually use the fuel. You put them together, and that's your full well-to-wake life cycle. All right, so now we know how we're going to measure things. Let's meet the contenders for the future of fuel. This study zooms in on two of the most promising alternatives out there that could one day replace the stuff we use now, methanol and ammonia.
So you've got methanol, which is a pretty simple alcohol. And then you have ammonia, a really powerful way to store and move energy. Now, the key thing they share is their flexibility. You can make both of them from fossil fuels, sure, but, and this is the important part, you can also make them using renewable energy.
And really, when you talk about making these fuels renewably, it almost always comes down to one critical ingredient: hydrogen. But, and this is a big but, not all hydrogen is the same. There's gray hydrogen, which is the standard, high-emission stuff made from natural gas. Then there's blue hydrogen, which is the same process, but they try to capture the CO2. And then, the holy grail, green hydrogen. It's made by splitting water using renewable electricity, and in theory, it's totally zero emission. We're about to see if that theory holds up. So take a look at this. This is basically how most hydrogen is made today. It's a process called steam methane reforming, and it uses natural gas for pretty much everything, which means, yep, it pumps out a lot of CO2. This is our high carbon starting point. But the journey doesn't stop there. To make ammonia, for example, you then have to combine that hydrogen with nitrogen from the air. This happens in what's called the Haber-Bosch process. And as you can see, it needs a ton of energy to create all that pressure and heat. The big takeaway here is that every single step in this chain costs energy, and where there's an energy cost, there's usually an emissions footprint. Okay, so the stage is set, we know our method, we've met the fuels. Now let's get to the good part. Let's dive into the heart of this study and see what the data actually tells us about these so-called e-fuels, the ones made from renewable electricity. This really is the moment of truth. When we look at that full, well-to-wake picture, which way of making a fuel like e-methanol actually truly delivers on that promise of being clean? And here it is. This chart is one of the key results from the study, showing the total greenhouse gas emissions for e-methanol. The only thing you need to remember is lower bars are better. Now, each bar is a different production method, and right off the bat, you can see there is a huge difference between them. Okay, let's zero in on the biggest chunk of those emissions, making the green hydrogen itself. Just look at how that emission bar drops like a rock as we go from using today's electrical grid, that's the 2024 bar, to the projected, much cleaner grid of 2050. This is it. This is the main insight. A green fuel is only as green as the electricity you use to make it. But here's another really fascinating detail. To make e-methanol, you need carbon, right? Usually from captured CO2. But look at this. The process of capturing that carbon itself has an emissions footprint. It takes a lot of energy. So there's no such thing as a free lunch, even with carbon capture. That's a huge hidden cost. And all of this brings us to the main finding of the whole study. And the researchers said it perfectly themselves. The GHG intensity of the electricity mix is a key criterion. It's not just a factor, it's the most important factor in figuring out if a future fuel is actually going to be low carbon. This finding has massive real-world implications, especially when it comes to geography. Just look at this map of global solar potential. To make truly green hydrogen, you need an insane amount of cheap, renewable electricity. And those regions in deep red and orange, places like Chile, Australia, parts of Africa, they have a gigantic natural advantage. Where we choose to produce these fuels is going to be absolutely critical. So after digging through all this data, after following the journey from the well all the way to the wake, what's the real key to decarbonization? The answer is actually a little surprising.
It turns out the cleanest fuel isn't actually a fuel. It's a process. It's a production chain that is powered from start to finish by 100% clean, zero-carbon electricity. The fuel itself, whether it's methanol or ammonia, is just the container for the energy. The process is what makes it green.
So let's just quickly recap the big takeaways here. Number 1, forget just looking at the tailpipe. Well to wake is the only number that really counts. 2, green fuels are only as clean as the grid that makes them. 3, even things we think are helping, like carbon capture, have their own energy cost. And all of that leads to the most important point of all. Cleaning up our electrical grids isn't just one piece of the puzzle. It is the foundation for absolutely everything else. And that leaves us with one final and pretty urgent question. These future fuels have incredible promise, but that promise depends entirely on a clean energy foundation, a foundation that we are still very much in the process of building. So the real question isn't just what fuel we're going to use in the future, but are we cleaning up our grids fast enough to make any of them truly clean?